You know that the reason why the Europeans were able to conquer the Americas was because the Europeans slept with animals? No, I don't mean in that way. I wonder how these Spanish conquistadors conquered so much of South and Central America with hardly any people. Cortez took on the Aztecs with only 550 men. Pizarro went into South America with 168. They were victorious not because of the guns and the steel they brought with them, but because of the disease. When Columbus landed on Guanaja, the island next to ours, in 1502, he'd been so sick for weeks that he hadn't written in his logbook. Dropped anchor, the local population came out in canoes to greet him, not knowing that he was leaving them with germs.
Now, that might not be new information for some people, but not only did they do this in the Americas, they also did this in the Pacific Islands, Australia, and of course, Africa. Like this article mentioned, since colonization, Africa has always been seen as a diseased and dirty place. As the colonization of Africa continued, more and more Africans saw an increase in famine and disease. Before the 19th century, most African states had mastered their environment and diseases were relatively under control. Like in the Americas, Africans had mastered farming and agricultural techniques for thousands of years that prevented famines and disease. And just like the cultural norms of the other indigenous populations around the world, Africa placed a great value on their environment and their animals. Like he mentioned in the previous video, wherever they went, devastation follows. And I don't think people understand the levels of devastation. But for example, in the 1880s, the Italian traders introduced the cattle disease rinderpest. Up to 90% of the cattle in parts of Central and Eastern Africa were killed by this disease. That included Tanzania, Kenya, Malawi, Zambia, and South Africa. From 1880 to 1890, it just took 10 years for them to destroy 90% of the cattle. The introduction of the slave trade brought disease as well, and not in the way that you think. Because of the introduction of the slave trade, specifically in East Africa, it produced new patterns of settlement. More people began to live in close proximity for security reasons, so they wouldn't be taken by slave traders. More people began living in close proximity, and previously inhabited areas became large forests that were a breeding ground for tsetse flies, especially in Central and Eastern Africa. Because of this, over 200,000 people died of sleeping sickness around the Lake Victoria area, just that area alone. When the disease spread to the Congo and to Zambia, it also did the same thing, killing hundreds of thousands of people. Now, European slave traders did bring diseases, but people tend to forget about the European settlers who drove it home. They brought smallpox, they brought jiggers that are sand flies that cause loss of limbs, cholera, meningitis, and yellow fever. Now, what the Europeans did in Africa as far as diseases could kind of be considered biological warfare, but it wasn't purposeful, so it can't be biological warfare, but there were deliberate attempts in an effort to colonize Africa that had devastating effects. The Germans killed about 80,000 people in Namibia, which broke down the agricultural methods and economic systems. This also happened in Ethiopia, Sudan, and Kenya, which in turn created famine in the 1880s and 1890s. Even though it was Europeans that brought diseases and famine, Africa, hunger, and disease all became the dominant stereotype in the European mindset, which reverberates to this day. I hope you learned something new.
Yes, they are masters of projection. And once you pick up on this behavior pattern of theirs, then everything starts to make sense. Then you would even stop asking, why are they doing this? Because you understand that they are projecting what they feel about themselves onto you. You also stop getting pissed and angry and feel the need to want to prove something to them. You also stop to care about what they think about you, because you now figure it out that what they are thinking about you is actually what they're thinking about themselves. A very good example of their projection is that rhetoric that they have of Africans are dirty. You as an African hears this and you are confused, wondering, why are they saying this? Because you bathe 2 times a day. All the Africans around you bathe 2 times a day. There are even days you bathe 3 times a day. But here you are hearing people who, if you go to TikTok search bar right now and type, why do people don't bathe, you would come by a plethora of videos of these people talking about how they don't bathe daily. You would come by videos of these people talking about how while they are bathing, they don't even wash their feet. You will come by a video, that one shocked me. These matured men and women gathered, podcast table, grown people talking about how they had not bathed their baby for 5 months. That video is on TikTok. If you go and search with the search words I gave you, you would come by that video. But these are the people telling you that you are dirty. We that even if we are just in our house, we did not go anywhere the whole day, we still bathe 2 times a day. Another very good example. These people are uncivilized. These people speaking. We need to go and civilize them. We need to go and help bring these people into the light. They are living in the darkness. Only for them to show up with this civilization. First of all, they show up with bacteria that people had never seen before. Germs, because they're not a bath. These people killed off people with blankets. On top of the civilization that they bring, people were dying. They were unaliving people in the millions, cutting off body parts. It could be like saying now when even they speak English, won't help these people explain to them what civilization really mean. Because obviously they did not know. Raping people left, right, center. Using children as bait to catch alligators. Using enslaved people's hair as stuffing for chairs. You would think that human beings cannot do what would make planet shake, but these people shook the entire planet. Our ecosystem is not the same again. It's crazy when you think about it. That's how bad it was. But to these people, it's you, or we, the rest of the world, that were uncivilized. Like, look in the mirror. It's like up is down, down is up mentality. You want to civilize people. Are you civilized? You don't first ask yourself that question. It's the projection. Because they know they are the uncivilized one. They first say, we'll tag them as the uncivilized one before they go notice. It's the projection. They definitely knew they were not civilized. I mean, come on. Civilization is their word. And they gave it the definition to it. You want to tell me those people looked at the word, looked at the definition, and they went, "It's us"? No, they knew they were not civilized. And they had no intentions of, civilizing themselves. So they decided to tag other people as civilized, project their own inherent feelings and thoughts about themselves upon these people. Another good example is this hatred for, dark skin or black people because of their skin. But man, we are seeing you sitting in the sun, risking having cancer, just so you can get a little bit of a tan. Like, just tell us that you wish you had some melanin. And the only reason why you are hating on melanin is because you don't have it and you are pissed at the facts. Let's call it what it is. Because we see the projection. It's glaring. Bloody spent 400 years trying to make people hate the skin they are burning into. But look at you jumping into tanning boots, man. So the whole thing is, like I said, they feel like shit, and they've been feeling like shit for years now. So because they can't make themselves feel better about themselves, they're like, I'm going to make you feel like shit as well, so that I can feel better about myself, because you just can't be having all of this ish going, and I can't get them. I'm pissed. So if I can't be happy, you can't be happy, basically. It's just crazy. You want to come and tell me about how superior you are because you don't have melanin. Man, you can't even step out of your house without sunscreen. Yeah, you are superior, all right. I already see all of the tactics for what it is. Master projection, like you call it. That's why I tell my people, whenever I hear them say anything at all negative about you, trust. They're actually talking about themselves. But they want to first project it onto you, so you can be distracted from actually seeing that this thing they're saying is actually about them. It's all a distraction. They are trying to distract you from seeing these parts of them by tagging you as a person who have these parts. So now you are so focused looking at yourself to see, am I really like this? Or how can I change? And how can I, prove that I'm not like this? When they are the ones who are actually supposed to be doing all of that work. But now you are so distracted thinking that they were right. While they can just go under the radar being that exact same thing that they are tagging you off that you are not. But before you figure it out, it's too late.
Guanaja had a vibrant trading economy, and they traded with other places, including our island. Within 30 years of Columbus landing on Guanaja, everybody on our island was dead. There was nobody left on Utila. Nobody. And they traded with the mainland, and those germs went with them. You may have heard of the lost city of the monkey god, which is a name given to it not because it's historically accurate, but because it sells books. That entire civilization collapsed when the diseases that came with Columbus reached into that far part of the Honduran jungle. One of the first things the archaeologists found there was this huge cache of broken idols. And as the disease was indiscriminately killing people throughout the city, the religious leaders brought these idols to one spot and broke them open. They thought that by breaking open the idol, they could release the god that had been entombed in it, and that god would come out and save them. But it didn't. Nothing could save them from these germs. And so the few remaining people dispersed into the jungle, and the jungle overtook the city, and it was lost from everybody for over 400 years. That story repeated itself throughout South America, Central America, and North America. Disease devastated these civilizations. So by the time the Europeans showed up, there was nobody to fight anymore. Their leaders were dead. Their armies were dead. 90 and 95% of all people in the Americas were dead within 60 years of Columbus arriving. That's at least 55 million people, maybe more than 100. The Europeans won because their diseases had meant there was nobody left to fight them. But that begs the question, why did the disease go from the Europeans over to the Americans? Why didn't it go from the Americans to the Europeans? And the answer is that as a culture, the Americans were clean and the Europeans were filthy. While people in the Americas washed every day, people in Europe wouldn't wash for months. And people in Europe lived with their animals. They brought them into their homes. They bedded down next to them. This meant that there was a high transmission rate of disease from their animals to humans. And because of the poor sanitary conditions that the humans lived in, it spread. This meant that Europe had diseases that had never existed in the Americas. It caused plagues in Europe that wiped out millions of people. The Black Plague is just one example. But over tens of thousands of years, the Europeans had developed natural antibodies to those diseases. That meant the Europeans could carry those diseases back to the Americas where nobody had those antibodies. And all of the plagues of Europe came crashing down in the Americas in one single event. Tens of millions of people would die, civilizations would collapse. And because the Europeans had been filthy and had lived with their animals, they were able to come in immune and just take over.